Welcome, everybody. My name is Larry Abramowitz. I'm the supervisor of special services here at Franklin Township School, and I have with me two of our speech therapists. Juliet Buffa is here, as well as Joe Munson, and we are here to present for you a speech and language presentation as part of our Special Education Parent Advisory Group, otherwise known as SEPAG. Before we get started with our speech presentation, I do just want to talk about SEPAG for a couple of moments. It is required that every school district have a parent advisory group, and we are looking for parents to get involved and be part of this initiative. The purpose of SEPAG is for parents to have an advisory role with the school district in terms of policies and practices and services. It allows for collaboration between our families and the school district on behalf of the students. It promotes awareness and education, and it also promotes a sense of community building. It gives us as a school district also some benefits: improved communication, better decision making, increased engagement with our families and with our students, and just an overall positive school culture. And I think for our families, it empowers our families. It provides a connection for parents and guardians to speak to each other and to learn from each other. It gives our parents a voice in the school district, and it certainly provides quite a bit of support for our families. So as part of this initiative, I did email all of our families some resources earlier today, including a document that talked about the value of the SEPAG. My email is on that document, as well as some of the other documents. So please feel free, if you are interested in being a part of our Special Education Parent Advisory Group, please feel free to email me, and I would love to speak with you to get you more involved. I'm going to now turn it over to Ms. Buffa and to Mr. Munson, and we'll get started with our speech presentation.
All right, hello. Welcome to the speech therapy presentation this evening. My name is Joe Munson, and I'm going to start things off here. Just a little bit about myself. I have been a speech therapist going on 7 years now. I graduated from Montclair State University in 2020. I worked at the Matheny School in PPAC for the first 4 years of my career, and that was a specialized school for children with more medical complexities. So I learned a lot about being a speech therapist in the schools there. I switched to public school last year. I was in Franklin, Somerset at the middle school there, and I learned a lot about the public school process, how things are a little bit different. And this year I'm here at Franklin Township. It's great to be here. It's a wonderful school community. Everybody here is amazing. And I'm very excited to be here tonight to talk about this topic. I also wanted to share that I'm married. I have 2 kids. We have a third on the way. And I have a cat, and I also have 10 chickens at home. So let's get started. We'll get into the presentation here. Actually, Juliet's gonna.
I'm Juliet Buffa. I also have a background in Montclair State University. I've been a speech therapist for a few years. My background is mostly in education, so I've been through a few schools, public and private. I have a special ed school particularly, so I have a background in helping kids with speech, language, fluency, as well as early intervention and working with children beginning with their PC devices as well. And I also have experience with private practice, so working with kids, toddlers up to high schoolers in different areas. In private practice, you kind of get a vast majority of different topics. So.
All right, so we're going to talk about the school SLP. Our title in New Jersey, when we work in the schools, is a speech language specialist. That's our certification that we get when we graduate from speech therapy school. So what do we do? So school-based speech language pathologists, or SLPs, as I said, also known as speech language specialists. We are certified professionals dedicated to helping students succeed in the classroom. We help with sounds, but that's not only what we do. We build the communication foundation required for all academic learning, social interaction, and literacy development. So defining the role. So we have a few different roles. We're educators, we're clinicians, and we're collaborators. So as far as educators, we work to ensure that students can access their curriculum. That's really like the overarching theme of what we do in the schools is help access curriculum. We're clinicians in the sense that we provide evidence-based therapy. We use evidence-based practice to target specific communication disorders. We really take an individualized approach to every student, and we figure out what we need to work on to help them access their curriculum. And then we collaborate with teachers, parents, all stakeholders in regards to each child, and we figure out their program, how we're going to be able to help them. So I think it's important for us to talk about education versus the medical model because they are different. And I think, you might hear the term speech language pathologist and think that wherever we are, we're doing the same thing. And in a lot of ways, it is similar. But the overarching goal in either medical and education are just a little bit different. So we're going to talk about that. So the key differences that we need to focus on are that in the school model, the focus is on educational relevance. And as I mentioned earlier, access to curriculum. So therapy targets communication skills that impact each student's ability to learn, participate in class, and socialize with their peers. So it's all about the education of the student. Whereas the medical model focuses on clinical diagnosis. It runs on codes, and it follows an insurance model. That's how it's billed. And it definitely can help education, but that's not the main goal. And so they do differ in that way. As far as the drivers for each, in the school setting, it's IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it's a federal law ensuring free, appropriate public education, also known as FAPE, tailored to individual needs for eligible children with disabilities from birth through age 21. It mandates special education services in the least restrictive environment, or LRE, and provides funding to states to support these services. So that's in the schools. And then as far as medical, it's driven by patient need and insurance. The goal in the school setting is academic access, as I mentioned, and then in the medical setting, it's curative. It's really looking to maximize potential, regardless of educational impact. And then as far as eligibility, in the school setting, if there's adverse educational impact, then that would qualify a student. And then in the medical setting, it's the diagnosis itself.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the IEP process. An IEP is an individualized education plan. So this is how students receive special education services or speech-only services through the school. This begins by a referral. This can be by a parent, a teacher, or other professional who notices a student's having difficulty with communication, language, or with their speech production. We do need parent consent to evaluate, so that would be done after an identification meeting where the team will meet together, which includes parents to discuss whether they are eligible for evaluation. Once we get consent for evaluation, we do a comprehensive evaluation. So that includes standardized testing, classroom observations, and we get teacher and parent input. This all considered in the evaluation along with other professionals who evaluate the child. After an evaluation is completed, an eligibility meeting is conducted. And if the child is deemed eligible after reviewing all the results of the evaluations, then an IEP is created. And through the IEP, they'll receive therapy services. And it's important to note that parents are very valuable to this part, so they're an essential part to the IEP team. And so I'm going to talk about multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS, specifically for speech. So MTSS is interventions that we provide before an IEP or special education services are provided as a form of, I guess, early intervention in which we would provide support either in the classroom or as a pull-out support and work on specific skills, whether that's speech sounds or language skills. And we work to help them before we recommend them for an IEP. So it's important to know that MTSS is not special education, and it does not require an IEP, but it's a way for us to track data for a certain period of time, depending on what intervention they need, in order to see if smaller interventions would be more helpful than going formally to an IEP. But if after a short period of time we're seeing minimal or no progress, we would recommend an IEP or start referring them for that process. I'm also going to talk about some of the areas that we work in. We work a lot in articulation. So this is our speech sound production and intelligibility. Articulation is the way that we produce speech sounds. So some children have difficulty producing certain speech sounds, which makes their speech harder to understand or harder for other people to understand. So for example, a child could say wabbit instead of rabbit, and that would be a common error that we would see. And here we have developmental milestones for different ages. So between 2 to 6, there are a varying amount of sounds that they should be acquiring. And it's important to know that children should be acquiring sounds at different ages and at different rates. So if a child, for example, is producing an R earlier than the age of 5, that's okay. If they take the time that they need and develop it before the age of 5, that's also appropriate. There are errors that are expected at younger ages. So when we do standardized testing for speech sound development, and we see that the children aren't meeting those sounds at those appropriate ages, then we would recommend them for speech services through us. So when working on helping children learning to produce sounds, we work on 3 different areas. So we work on moving their articulators appropriately. So making sure their tongue is in the right place, that their teeth or their lips are in the right place as well to produce the sound. We also work on increasing awareness of those sound errors so that they know when they're producing the correct sound, and also moving through different levels so that we can reach generalization. So we usually start at isolation level, which is the sound on its own, and then move up to syllable, word, phrase, sentence, all the way up to generalization, which means that they're able to produce the sound in all settings independently. Within the speech therapy that we do with the children, it can be individually or in a group, and we use interactive and engaging activities and use a drill practice to have them practice as much as they can within our time together. But ultimately, our goal is to provide generalization. So we work to make sure that they're able to produce the sound within our structured session and outside in the classroom, and especially at home. So,
any questions at this point? Feel free during the presentation, if you have any questions, you can type them out in the chat and we'll address them. So at any point in time, just you can ask a question. All right, so the next area we're going to look at is language. So this is the building blocks of learning and expression. When we talk about speech clarity, sometimes it's articulation, sometimes in this case with language, it's how a student might formulate their words. And when we talk about receptive language, this first area here within language, it's understanding others. So how well does the student understand others in their environment? In the classroom, are they understanding their teacher well? Are they understanding their friends well? It refers to how a student understands what is said to them. This involves following directions, identifying concepts, and understanding spoken content. So the challenge here is that students in the classroom, if they're having deficiencies in their receptive language, they might look like they're obstinate. They might look rebellious, or they might look like they don't want to listen to the teacher. But in reality, it could be that they just don't really understand what is expected of them because of their language deficit. So when we are evaluating a student, we look at receptive language to make sure that's not the bottleneck. And if it is, then we will target specific areas within receptive language that we're seeing the breakdown, and we work on them in therapy to help the student better understand what's expected of them in the classroom. And then paired with that is expressive language. So the first receptive is what we take in, and then what we output is expressive language. So it's the sharing of how we're feeling, how we're thinking on the inside. So it's how a student uses words and sentences to share thoughts. So this includes areas such as vocabulary, grammar, and sentence structure. Morphology goes into this too, which is things like grammatical words, articles, the or a, indefinite articles. It could also be prefixes and suffixes, things like that. So how a student is putting their words together to get their thoughts across. We help students find the right words and put them together to tell stories, answer questions, and participate in class discussions. So if you have a student that's having some difficulty with expressive language, they might be difficult to understand because they're not putting the words in the right order that they should, or they're not exactly hitting the point that they're trying to, or even some students have word finding difficulties where they know the vocabulary, but to retrieve it at the right time can be difficult. And so during the evaluation process, we also look to see, is expressive language an area that we need to work on? And if so, we create goals to target the specific areas that are deficient. A question that I hear with this one is, how can we actually help with expressive language? What are things that we do? For me in my therapy, I find that graphic organizers are very helpful for these kinds of students. It really helps organize the thinking process when it comes to creating sentences or narratives, retelling a story. If I read a story to a student, I want them to tell it back to me using good sentence structure and using the sentences in the right order to tell the story accurately. Graphic organizers are very helpful for that because they kind of take some of the cognitive load off the student and they can kind of follow the procedure. That might look like a worksheet that has a flow chart, and they fill it in with the therapist or with their teacher. And then the goal would be to fade that away so they don't need that support anymore because they know how to think about it at that point. So that's a very common thing that I use in my practice. And then the next area we'll talk about is social communication. So we talked about receptive language, expressive language. So those are what we take in, what we output. As far as the kind of the meat of the language, when we're talking about social communication, it's what we call pragmatics, and that's how we actually use the language. So are you saying the sentence correctly, and are you saying it at the right time? Are you using the right inflection? Are you asking appropriate questions? This goes into conversation skills, so turn taking, staying on topic, asking relevant questions, looking at the body language of the person you're talking to and telling by that if they're engaged or if they're not engaged, and if you need to share more information or less information. So it's a lot of nonverbal information. Like I said, body language, eye contact, tone of voice. And it goes into this area called pragmatics, which is adapting the language based on who you're talking to and where you are. So in that way, we could call that like a hidden curriculum where we have these unwritten rules of social interaction everywhere in the school, whether it's in the hallway, in the cafeteria, on the playground, in the classroom. There's these hidden rules of how we interact with others that some students might have a hard time with. And if there is a student that has some deficiencies in this area, a lot of times we'll put them in group settings so we can facilitate that back and forth relationship with someone else and help them to better interact with their peers.
We also help in the area of fluency. So fluency is a smooth flow of speech. Some children have difficulty with fluency where they feel like they're stuck in their speech, or they'll repeat sounds or parts of words over, or prolong words, make them a little longer. Usually it's just called stuttering. And it's important to know that it's common for young children to have just moments or periods of disfluency. But when we think of disfluency, we're really looking at if the stutter continues over time, becomes more frequent, or if the child is starting to show signs of tension or frustration. So during our treatment with them, we don't just focus on the child's speech, but we also focus on their confidence and their comfort with communication. So we do work on strategies to help them with controlling the stutter, whether that's working on smooth, slow speech, or using different techniques called like easy starts, where they're using some breath control with their speech. So we don't only focus on the strategies, but their ability to be comfortable with stuttering as well. So and we also work a lot with families directly and teachers on how to work with children who stutter and how to respond and support them in the classroom. So it's important to know, especially at home, if you have a child who's stutter or starting to stutter, to monitor it, but to also let them finish what they're saying without interruptions. It's really important, and to focus on what they say, not how they're saying it. And you can model smooth, slow speech to them. Another area we work on in the schools is voice health or vocal hygiene, which refers to taking care of our voice so we can speak clearly without strain. This is something that's common. Sometimes children will develop voice concerns that make their voice hoarse, raspy, or breathy, which is outside of sickness. So if you notice that the child's has a raspy or hoarse voice and outside of sickness, it's been going on for a few weeks, then this would be something that we would be concerned about. Are they using appropriate vocal hygiene? So it's usually due to how they're using their voice day to day. Some habits that some common habits that can put stress on the vocal cords is frequent yelling or screaming if they're talking very loud for long periods of time, excessive throat clearing or coughing. So some sickness can cause vocal strain in that sense. And dehydration. So I do have a picture of over time, if it's prolonged, vocal nodules can form. An otolaryngologist would be able to take a better look at that and tell you if there are vocal nodules that are causing the strain, and in which case we use vocal hygiene strategies to help heal the voice, drinking plenty of water, so to treat the dehydration, making sure that they're using comfortable speaking volumes instead of yelling across rooms, taking voice breaks, reducing the throat clearing usually through encouragement of drinking more water, and maintaining overall health, especially during colder allergies, because that could cause a strain on the voice as well. So our goal is to help them make sure they're using these strategies and keeping up with the hygiene strategies in order to heal the voice and allow for a normal voice to come back.
All right, we're going to talk about AAC, which is augmentative and alternative communication. So this is for students who maybe are minimally verbal. They might have a couple of words that they say verbally, or maybe no words at all that they say verbally. This gives them a voice. And there's a number of students in our school now who use these kinds of systems. And Juliet and myself both have experience working with students with these kinds of technologies. And every student has a right to have a voice. And this is one way that we work on it with some of our students. So it basically is anything besides your spoken voice that helps you to communicate messages to others. There's many different forms of AAC. We're not going to get into all the different areas that would require another presentation. But the basic idea is that there's low tech, which is things like picture boards. If you've ever heard of the PEC system, the Picture Exchange Communication System, that's a low tech system. So they're pictures that you actually print out and you laminate, or like a board. And you laminate it, and the student can point to it to indicate what they want to convey. We also have mid-tech. There isn't a picture on here of that, but mid-tech would be like an old GoTalk device. They're almost like tablets, but they're dedicated devices that they're not like iPads, but they have voice output, and they have like a record button on it. They're a little bit antiquated, but some people still use them, and for some kids, they can be very helpful. Ones that don't need a full dynamic display like an iPad, but they're not as common. We don't have any students currently using them in our school. And then we have high tech, which is something that we see a lot in the schools. Those are things like iPads or tablets that have voice output. So the student presses a symbol on the screen, and the device says whatever the icon is. So they might hit eat, and people in the room can hear the word eat come out. So we work on students using that system to expand their expressive language. We'll use it to put 2 words together, 3 words together. We use it when we're doing things like functional communication tasks. If a student is greeting others in the hallway, it's a great way for them to connect with others around them socially. So we work on all those things, and there's different applications that we get into when we do evaluations. We figure out which app is going to be the best for the student to learn. So you might have heard of apps like Proloquo or TouchChat. there's many different companies that make applications for iPads and tablets. I'm not going to get into all the specifics, but there is this avenue for students to be able to communicate, and it's very rewarding to help students communicate in this way. And then there's unaided. That would be things like modified signs. Juliet and I just went to a presentation that talked about how ASL itself is not a form of augmentative communication, but modified signs, baby signs, it's also called home sign language, that could be considered unaided AAC. That would be things like gestures, body language, for students that are minimally speaking or maybe nonverbal. We look for those kind of signs to tell us what they want or what they're feeling, if they're feeling uncomfortable, if they're feeling happy, whatever it might be. We have to be good communication partners to help them, get their message across to others in their environment. So that's AAC. And then we're going to get into functional communication here. I don't think there's any questions at this point, so I'm going to continue. I will say, though, before I move on, one question that I get about AAC is if my child gets an AAC device, will they stop trying to communicate verbally because now they have a device that will do it for them? And a lot of parents really want to focus on verbal speech. And what I say is the research shows that using AAC helps actually increase verbal output. So, and for whatever reason it might be, we can hypothesize that it's because they're getting more output, more input from their device. They're hearing the words more often. Another theory, and I think this one has a lot of validity to it in my clinical experience. But when you teach someone how to use communication, the power of communication, it really is motivating for them to communicate more. And so if they're able to work hard and get a couple verbal words out, they're more motivated to do that because they understand the power of communication. So that's what I tell parents. We really like to follow a total communication approach where we honor all forms of communication. We don't limit a child. You have to use the talker. I call it the talker, the AAC device. You don't have to use that. You don't have to just use verbal speech. You can use whatever you feel on any given day and just maximize their options for communicating. So when we talk about the self-contained setting, we're focused a lot on functional communication. So this would be like the self-contained classroom, the MD classroom. In this setting, we focus a lot on functional communication. And this means helping students with complex needs communicate their basic wants, needs, and feelings throughout the entire school day. We emphasize independence and sensory regulation within a highly structured environment. Therapy in this setting can often be life skills based. Such as doing activities like cooking, laundry, coffee cart. We do coffee cart at our school. It's a way for the MD students to work on their pre-vocational skills, and work on things like counting money and telling people how much things cost and taking orders and really practicing those skills. And some of the students use their AAC devices during these activities to interact with those around the school. So there are ways that we can help them with their pre-vocational skills. And we focus a lot on core vocabulary. So those are things like high frequency words with flexible usage. That would be like go, stop, more, help, eat. These concepts, they have a lot of bang for their buck. So, with these students, we might have to target a word many, many times for the student to learn it. And we want those words to be highly flexible across multiple environments and settings.
There are different ways SLPs can provide services in the school. We have pull-out therapy and push-in support. So pull-out therapy, the student leaves the classroom for a short period of time with the SLP to be in a smaller setting. This can be individually or in a group. Pull-out therapy is really good because it has fewer distractions. It allows for more focused intervention, and it can, be more intense, especially if it's one-on-one. And we also have push-in support. So the SLP goes into the classroom and helps the student within the classroom, or they help the teacher and we specifically target the goals that the student has on their IEP. Push-in therapy is really good for generalization of skills, as well as working on more practical skills. So if that's social skills, then working on, having conversations, or maybe it's even like asking more questions, self-advocacy, things like that. So it's good for, or if it's even speech sounds, making sure that they're using it in the classroom if they need more support in that area. But it's important to know that neither is better than the other. It just depends on what the student needs. We measure success in different ways. So many parents ask me in meetings, how can I make sure my child is progressing, or how do I know if they're progressing at home? So these are the ways that we monitor some growth. One really important way is through data tracking. So every IEP goal that we create through the IEP is tracked to make sure that they're making progress. So we use evidence-based practice strategies to work on these specific goals. There are different ones, not everyone works for every child. So we make sure as we track data that these strategies are working for the children. And it's really important for us to know as well, if it's not working, that maybe we need to change some strategies up, but also to make sure that they are progressing overall. Quarterly reports are sent to parents every quarter, right around report card time, and this shows progress for every IEP goal. So you should be able to see how they're progressing, or if the goals aren't yet being targeted throughout the year. And ultimately, we look for mastery. So we look for our aim is that every child is going to master every goal that's written on their IEP. So we track. That's why we mostly track the data, to make sure that at the end of the day that our aim is to get to mastery, and that they're able to do these skills independently, independently or over multiple sessions, to show independence. And sometimes we observe that mastery within the classroom itself. So. Speech and language supports work best in a team. So we collaborate with teachers, counselors, other professionals in the school, to make sure that we're all working on the strategies, or using the best strategies we can. One important way is consultation. So SLPs would work with the teachers, special ed staff, to make sure we're using the same strategies, or on the same page, because most of the time, especially with more functional goals, we have the same aim. Or if you're working in the MD room, sometimes we share those functional communication goals. So making sure we're working on strategies together. Consultation is also important if we're talking about AAC as well. Making sure that teachers or paraprofessionals are trained on how to use the device with the student, or that's the best way to use those devices as well. We talked about fluency before as well. How can the teacher appropriately work with someone who stutters, or if you're having a hard time, teachers are having a hard time understanding kids, how can they also work on those sounds within the classroom? Inclusion, we value inclusion a lot. So making sure that we're modifying materials, same thing with collaboration, consultation, making sure that we're working on similar materials to make sure that the student is able to access it. And that includes all settings too, whether it's in the lunchroom or in the gym, making sure that they're able to be included in all activities as well. So, and then parent connection. So we're connected a lot with parents. Those who have IEPs, we see them annually. But we make sure to reach out every once in a while to make sure things are progressing at home as well. The whole idea is that even in structure settings, while we're working on those things, that outside in the classroom or at home, that they're also showing growth as well. So we value input from the parents on, if things are working well at home, or if parents reach out, we can provide materials either to promote speech sound production, or at language skills at home, say you're working on reading at home, things like that. And lastly, we have, there are daily opportunities that parents can take to help at home. What I didn't mention before in speech sound production, which is a very common question we get, is how can we help at home with speech? Reading, we read books a lot in our speech session. So working on reading and making sure we're targeting sounds at reading level. If they're at the higher level, if they're not at a lower level, I would usually do a craft once a week that I send home, and that kind of gives information on what level the student is at and what words you can practice. So there are resources that you can use at home, so you can understand kind of where they're at and what progress they're making. If it's more language goal, reading is also still really great. Asking questions about reading, pointing out words to increase vocabulary, making sure if your child does have an AAC device that you're practicing at home, or that you can think of questions so that you can use the device easier at home as well. And if there's any other language or fluency concerns as well, that you really keep in touch with the speech therapist so you can we can provide you best practical services at home. So, are there any other questions? Okay. Yeah.
That concludes our speech and language presentation. We can wait a few more seconds to see if anyone at home does have any questions. And if you don't, if you think of them later or tomorrow, you can certainly email myself. You can email Mr. Munson or Mrs. Bufa. No other questions? We don't see anything still.
Thank you for your time and efforts. Billy says hi.
We thank you. We thank you. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. We appreciate it.